In the desolate oil fields southeast of Houston, where the humid Texas air mingles with the scent of crude oil and industrial decay, lies a 25-acre patch of land that would become synonymous with terror, mystery, and unsolved murder. On April 4, 1984, a dog carried a human skull to a nearby house in what locals simply called the field, an act that would unveil the first chapter of what would become known as the Texas Killing Fields, one of America's most haunting cold case mysteries. The skull belonged to Heidi Marie Villarreal-Fye, a 25-year-old cocktail waitress whose disappearance 6 months earlier had left her family desperate for answers. What began as a simple evening walk to make a phone call would tragically become the catalyst for decades of fear, investigation, and heartbreak that continues to this day. A life cut short, Heidi Marie Villarreal-Fye was a young woman trying to rebuild her life in the early 1980s. At 25, she worked as a cocktail waitress, a job that required charm, resilience, and the ability to navigate the complexities of nightlife service. Like many young adults of her generation, she was independent yet maintained close ties with her family, often staying with her parents in League City, Texas, a small community located between Houston and Galveston. League City in 1983 was a growing suburban area, benefiting from its proximity to Houston's booming oil industry, while maintaining the close-knit feel of a smaller community. The town was considered relatively safe, the kind of place where families felt secure raising children and where a young woman could walk to a convenience store without fear. This sense of security would be shattered by what happened to Heidi and the string of murders that would follow. Heidi was described by those who knew her as vivacious and friendly, someone who could easily connect with customers in her waitressing job. She had been staying with her parents' home, presumably between apartments or jobs, a common arrangement for young adults navigating the economic uncertainties of the early 1980s. She maintained a relationship with a boyfriend who lived in Houston, about 30 miles away, requiring coordination and communication to maintain their connection across the distance. The last evening. October 10, 1983, the evening of October 10, 1983, began like any other for Heidi. The 23-year-old was staying with her parents when she decided to walk to a local gas station on October 10, 1983, to use the pay phone in order to call her boyfriend. This detail speaks to an era before cell phones, when staying connected with someone required careful planning and access to payphones or landlines. Heidi Marie Villarreal-Fye was last seen alive at a convenience store located off of West Main Street and Hobbs in League City, Texas on 10 October 1983. The convenience store, situated at the intersection of West Main Street and Hobbs, was a familiar landmark in the area, the kind of establishment that served as an informal community gathering point, where locals picked up necessities, grabbed snacks, and, importantly for Heidi's purpose that evening, made phone calls. The walk from her parents' home to the convenience store would have been relatively short, likely no more than a few blocks through a neighborhood she knew well. For a 25-year-old woman accustomed to working late hours in the service industry, an evening walk to make a phone call would have seemed routine, even mundane. There was no reason for her family to worry when she left the house that night. What exactly transpired at the convenience store remains unclear. Whether Heidi successfully made her phone call, whether she encountered someone there, or whether something happened on her journey to or from the store are questions that have never been definitively answered. What is certain is that this ordinary errand would be the last time anyone would see Heidi Marie Villarreal-Fye alive. When Heidi failed to return home that evening, her family's concern grew with each passing hour. By the next morning, it was clear something was terribly wrong. Heidi was not the type to disappear without explanation, and her failure to return home or make contact was completely out of character. Her family contacted local authorities, and the search for Heidi began. The search and growing concern, the initial response to Heidi's disappearance, reflected the standard procedures of early 1980s law enforcement. Missing person cases, particularly involving adults, were often handled with the assumption that the individual might have left voluntarily. This approach, while sometimes justified, could unfortunately delay critical early investigation efforts when foul play was actually involved. Heidi's family, however, knew immediately that something was wrong. Her close relationship with her parents, her established work routine, and her personality all indicated that a voluntary disappearance was highly unlikely. They pressed authorities to take the case seriously, and began their own informal search efforts, reaching out to friends, coworkers, and anyone who might have information about Heidi's whereabouts. The League City Police Department launched an investigation, interviewing witnesses at the convenience store, canvassing the neighborhood, and checking with Heidi's known associates. Her boyfriend in Houston was contacted and cooperated with the investigation. Friends and coworkers from her waitressing job were interviewed. Despite these efforts, no solid leads emerged. As days turned into weeks, the case began to grow cold. Without physical evidence, witnesses to an abduction, or any clear indication of what had happened to Heidi, investigators had little to work with. The family continued to hope for her safe return. But as October turned to November and then to winter, that hope began to fade. The media coverage of Heidi's disappearance was limited, reflecting both the smaller scale of local news operations in the early 1980s and the unfortunate reality that missing person cases involving young adults often received less attention than those involving children. This lack of widespread media attention may have hindered the investigation by limiting the number of potential witnesses who became aware of the case. Throughout the winter of 1983 to 1984, Heidi's case remained open but inactive. Her family continued to hope and pray for her return, while investigators periodically reviewed the file but had no new leads to pursue. The harsh reality was that without additional evidence or witnesses, the case was at a standstill. The gruesome discovery. April 4, 1984, the first victim, Heidi Villarreal-Fye, 23, a cocktail waitress, was found after a dog carried her skull to a nearby house on April 4, 1984. The discovery was as shocking as it was macabre. A family dog, exploring the oil fields near Calder Road in League City, returned home carrying what appeared to be a human skull. The horrified homeowners immediately contacted authorities. Heidi Fye's remains were discovered in the oil fields located at the end of Calder Ard, in League City, Texas. Fye was identified through dental records. The location was a desolate stretch of land, characterized by oil derricks, overgrown vegetation, and the kind of isolated terrain that provided perfect cover for criminal activity. The area was not frequented by the general public, making it an ideal location for someone looking to dispose of evidence. When police arrived at the scene, they found additional skeletal remains scattered throughout the immediate area. The harsh Texas weather, combined with local wildlife and the passage of nearly 6 months, had reduced Heidi's body to skeletal remains. The condition of the remains made determining the exact cause of death challenging, but investigators were able to gather crucial evidence. A medical examiner determined that besides being beaten and left with broken ribs, she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. The medical examination revealed the brutal nature of Heidi's death. The medical examiner conducted an examination, and apart from the body being beaten, she also had broken ribs, and cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. The broken ribs suggested a prolonged and violent assault, indicating that Heidi had likely suffered significantly before her death. The blunt force trauma to the head was determined to be the ultimate cause of death, suggesting she had been struck with a heavy object with sufficient force to cause fatal injuries. Heidi's remains were recovered and identified, with her body completely nude with indications of sexual abuse. The discovery of Heidi's remains transformed the case from a missing person investigation to a homicide. The remote location, the evidence of sexual assault, and the brutal manner of death all pointed to a predatory killer who had specifically chosen this isolated area to commit and conceal their crime. The investigation intensifies with the recovery of Heidi's remains. The League City Police Department launched a full homicide investigation. The crime scene was thoroughly processed, with investigators searching the surrounding area for any additional evidence that might provide clues to the killer's identity. The remote location presented both challenges and opportunities for the investigation. On one hand, the isolation of the crime scene meant there were few witnesses and limited opportunities for someone to have observed the killer disposing of Heidi's body. The passage of 6 months had also allowed weather and wildlife to compromise much of the physical evidence. On the other hand, the specific choice of location suggested the killer was familiar with the area and might be local to the region. Investigators began developing a profile of the likely perpetrator. The evidence suggested someone with local knowledge, access to transportation, and the physical capability to overpower and transport a 25-year-old woman. The sexual assault component indicated a predatory motive, while the remote disposal site suggested premeditation and an awareness of locations where a body might remain undiscovered for extended periods. The investigation expanded to include a review of similar cases in the Houston area. Investigators looked for patterns involving missing women, sexual assaults, and cases involving remote disposal sites. They also began examining the backgrounds of individuals with access to the oil fields, including workers, hunters, and others who might be familiar with the terrain. Despite these efforts, the investigation struggled to develop solid leads. The extended time between Heidi's disappearance and the discovery of her remains had eliminated many potential sources of physical evidence. Witness memories had faded, and the trail had grown cold. The case required a break, either from new physical evidence or from a witness willing to come forward with information. The birth of the Texas killing fields, what investigators did not yet realize, was that Heidi's murder was not an isolated incident. Between 1984 and 1991, the bodies of 4 women were found in this area, and their murders remain unsolved. The same desolate stretch of land where Heidi's remains had been discovered would yield additional victims, earning it the ominous nickname of the Texas killing fields. The Texas Killing Fields is a title used to denote the area surrounding the Interstate 45 I-45 corridor southeast of Houston, where since the early 1970s, 34 bodies have been found, and specifically to a 25-acre 10-ha patch of land in Leg City, Texas, where 4 women were found between 1983 and 1991. The pattern that would emerge was chilling in its consistency. Young women and girls, often between the ages of 12 and 25, would disappear from the greater Houston area. Months or years later, their remains would be discovered in remote locations, particularly in the oil fields near Lake City. Many of the victims shared similar physical characteristics, suggesting a predatory killer with specific preferences. Later that year, 16-year-old Laura Miller disappeared in September 1984, just months after Heidi's remains had been discovered. Laura's case would follow a tragically similar pattern, a young woman vanishing without a trace, only to have her remains discovered in the same general area years later. The emergence of additional cases transformed the investigation from a single homicide to a potential serial killer investigation. The FBI became involved, bringing additional resources and expertise to what was clearly a complex and challenging case. The realization that a predator was actively hunting young women in the Houston area sent shockwaves through local communities. The ongoing mystery, despite decades of investigation, Heidi's murder remains unsolved. The case has been featured in numerous true crime documentaries, television shows, and books, keeping her story in the public consciousness and maintaining pressure on investigators to find answers. The FBI and local police are seeking clues in the unsolved murders of 4 women whose bodies were discovered in a remote wooded field in a small Texas town between Houston and Galveston. The Texas Killing Fields case has become one of America's most notorious cold cases, representing not just the unsolved murders of multiple young women, but also the limitations of 1980s investigative techniques and the challenges of tracking serial predators across jurisdictional boundaries. Modern investigators have applied new technologies, including advanced DNA analysis and geographic profiling, to the decades-old evidence. Various suspects have been investigated over the years, including individuals with criminal histories involving sexual assault, residents of the local area with knowledge of the oil fields, and transient workers who might have had access to the region during the relevant time periods. However, none of these investigations has resulted in charges related to Heidi's murder. The case has also highlighted issues within the criminal justice system of the 1980s, including limited resources for missing person investigations, challenges in coordinating multi-jurisdictional cases, and the difficulties in maintaining evidence integrity over extended periods. These systemic issues may have contributed to the lack of resolution in Heidi's case and others like it. Impact on the community. Heidi's murder and the subsequent discovery of additional victims fundamentally changed the character of League City and the surrounding region. What had been considered a safe, growing suburban community suddenly found itself at the center of a serial killer investigation. Parents became more protective of their children, particularly young women. The sense of security that had characterized the area was replaced by wariness and fear. The case also had a profound impact on the families of the victims. Heidi's parents were forced to endure not only the loss of their daughter, but also the ongoing uncertainty about who was responsible and whether justice would ever be served. The lack of closure compounded their grief and made the healing process extraordinarily difficult. Local law enforcement agencies were also affected by the case. The complexity and scope of the investigation stretched resources and highlighted the need for better coordination between agencies. The case contributed to improvements in missing person protocols, evidence preservation techniques, and interagency cooperation that would benefit future investigations. The media attention surrounding the Texas killing fields cases also brought increased scrutiny to the investigation efforts. While this attention helped keep the cases in the public eye and potentially generated new leads, it also created pressure on investigators and sometimes led to speculation that could complicate the investigation process. Theories and speculation over the decades since Heidi's murder, numerous theories have emerged about who might have been responsible for her death and the other Texas killing fields murders. These theories have ranged from a single serial killer operating over an extended period to multiple perpetrators taking advantage of the remote location to dispose of victims. Some investigators have theorized that the killer or killers had specific knowledge of the oil field area, possibly through employment or residence in the region. The isolated nature of the disposal sites suggests familiarity with local geography and an understanding of areas that were unlikely to be regularly visited by the general public. Other theories have focused on the possibility of a transient killer, someone who traveled through the Houston area periodically and used the remote locations as convenient disposal sites. This theory would explain the sporadic timing of the murders and the difficulty in identifying local suspects, with connections to all the victims. The similarity in victimology, young women and girls, often with similar physical characteristics, has led some to theorize about a predator with specific preferences who actively hunted for victims matching his desired profile. This theory is supported by the evidence of sexual assault in several of the cases. More recently, some investigators have explored the possibility that multiple killers might have used the same disposal area, either coincidentally or through some form of communication or coordination. This theory attempts to explain some of the variations in victim characteristics and crime scene evidence across the different cases. Modern investigation techniques advances in forensic science have brought new hope to the investigation of Heidi's murder and the other Texas killing fields cases. DNA analysis techniques that were not available in the 1980s have been applied to preserved evidence from the crime scenes. While some evidence has degraded over the decades, investigators have been able to develop DNA profiles in several of the cases. Modern geographic profiling techniques have also been applied to the cases, using computer modeling to analyze the locations of abductions, disposal sites, and suspect residences to identify areas where the perpetrator might have lived or worked. These techniques have helped focus investigative efforts on specific geographic areas and suspect populations. Cold case units, equipped with modern investigative techniques and the benefit of hindsight, have also reviewed the cases with fresh perspectives. These units have been able to identify connections and patterns that might not have been apparent to investigators working with 1980s technology and databases. The development of genealogical DNA analysis has also opened new avenues for investigation. This technique, which uses DNA evidence to identify suspects through family relationships rather than direct matches, has been successful in solving other cold cases and offers hope for the Texas killing fields cases. The lasting legacy Heidi Marie Villarreal-Fye's tragic death became the cornerstone of one of America's most enduring cold case mysteries. Her case was not just the first of the Texas killing fields murders. It was the beginning of a decades-long investigation that has captivated true crime enthusiasts, challenged law enforcement, and brought attention to the broader issues of violence against women and the investigation of serial crimes. Unfortunately, it was pretty difficult to mount a continuing investigation into Hyde's homicide, as there was a dearth of physical evidence and witnesses, a challenge that continues to plague the case today. The limitations of 1980s investigative techniques, combined with the remote location and extended time between the crime and discovery created significant obstacles that modern investigators continue to work to overcome. The case has also contributed to improvements in missing person protocols, evidence preservation, and multi jurisdictional cooperation. Law enforcement agencies have learned valuable lessons from the challenges encountered in investigating the Texas killing fields cases, leading to better practices that have benefited subsequent investigations. Heidi's story serves as a reminder of the human cost of unsolved crimes. Behind the statistics and case files is a young woman whose life was cut short, a family that continues to seek answers, and a community that was forever changed by her tragic death. Her case represents not just an unsolved murder, but a call for continued vigilance in protecting vulnerable members of society and pursuing justice for victims of violent crime. Conclusion: the murder of Heidi Marie Villarreal-Fye remains an open wound in the fabric of American criminal justice. Nearly 4 decades after her death, her killer remains free, and her family continues to wait for answers. The case that began with a dog carrying a skull home has evolved into one of the most studied and discussed cold cases in American history. What makes Heidi's case particularly tragic is not just the brutal nature of her death, but the way it opened the door to a series of similar crimes that terrorized the Houston area for years. Her murder was the first documented case in what would become known as the Texas killing fields, a designation that speaks to the systematic nature of the violence that would follow. The investigation continues today, with modern investigators applying cutting edge techniques to decades old evidence. While the passage of time has created significant challenges, it has also provided new tools and perspectives that offer hope for eventually solving the case. Advances in DNA analysis, geographic profiling, and data management have all been brought to bear on Heidi's case and the other Texas killing fields murders. The case also serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of never giving up on victims of violent crime. Heidi's story has been told and retold through documentaries, books, podcasts, and television shows, ensuring that her memory remains alive and that pressure continues on investigators to find her killer. This ongoing attention has generated new leads over the years and demonstrates the power of public interest in supporting criminal investigations. For Heidi's family, the decades since her death have been marked by grief, hope, frustration, and an unwavering determination to see justice served. Their persistence in keeping her case active and their cooperation with investigators and media outlets has been instrumental in maintaining focus on the case and generating new investigative leads. The Texas killing fields, born from the discovery of Heidi's remains, stands as one of America's most notorious cold cases. It represents the darkest aspects of human nature, predatory violence against vulnerable victims, but also demonstrates the resilience of families, communities, and law enforcement in their refusal to accept that some crimes will never be solved. Heidi Marie Villarreal-Fye was more than just the first victim of the Texas killing fields. She was a daughter, a young woman with hopes and dreams, someone who deserved the chance to live her life free from violence. Her story continues to resonate because it represents